I'm glad to be back with the Cahills after so long on another adventure around the world as they rush to save it from the hands of a new villain. 13-year-old Dan and his older sister Amy make a mistake that leads to catastrophic consequences for the entire Cahill family and possibly the world. It's only been 6 months since they saved the world from the Vespers, since they lost so many, since Natalie, Alistair, McIntyre, Evan, and Isabel. Our story begins with a prologue that sets up our antagonists, a family of some kind, with very skilled, powerful, genius, and wealthy individuals. The father calls for the beginning of an operation to eliminate a target. On Mount Washington in New Hampshire, a squad of 6 identical-looking elite henchmen are assigned their next targets, 2 children. In Attleboro, Massachusetts, Amy, Dan, and Aunt Beatrice are getting ready to bury William McIntyre's ashes. Jake Rosenblum texts to reassure her he's still in Rome with his brother Atticus. As the funeral gets underway, Aunt Beatrice gets on about how there are only 3 of them, but Amy tells her she didn't invite anyone else, very firm in her decision.
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment.
The funeral director quickly wraps things up, and then Aunt Beatrice is already entering her limo. Amy and Dan stay behind to drop dirt into the grave. As they turn to go, the clergyman attacks them and shoves them into the grave. At first, Amy begins to panic, but is pulled out of it by Dan. She assesses the situation as Dan shoves her out of the way of a thrown box of Mr. McIntyre's ashes, missing her head by inches. She gets the idea to use the box as a step, have Dan stand on it, and boost her up. She reaches up and pulls down the shovel the clergyman is using. The man, one of the elite henchmen, runs off and Amy thinks he'll be back soon and quickly uses the shovel to climb out. But the man, barely 50 yards away, turns around as another man emerges from a shed holding a shovel. Both begin running towards her. She doesn't have time to get Dan out. Instead, she decides to lead them away, running deeper into the cemetery, the henchman hot on her tail. One almost gets her with a shovel, but she dodges and comes back with a roundhouse kick to the throat, but he barely even reacts.
Who is this guy?
He comes at her with the shovel, chasing her around the grave of Evan Tolliver. She keeps running, spotting a car coming into the cemetery and runs towards it. A woman gets out, and instead of helping, begins taking photos. Then another car with 2 men also pulls in and begins taking photos. Amy turns, confused, to see the men quickly retreating in the distance. She runs back to McIntyre's grave and uses a ladder nearby to get Dan out of the hole. Then Nellie pulls into the cemetery in a yellow Jeep and picks up the kids. She asks them what happened, and they tell her about the men who attacked. They theorize they were hired muscle. Back at the Cahill mansion, they decide to hit the Cahill network and see if there are any alerts, and sure enough, they're trending. Apparently, the story of them stealing art for the Vespers got out, accompanied by photos stolen from Nellie's phone. They even had a story about the Cahills in the cemetery, framing it as a wild party. Their reputation is under attack, and all the media companies are owned by Founders Media. Nellie tells them it's owned by J. Rutherford Pierce, a political pundit who is very popular. His fans are called Piercers. He has 2 kids, Dan and Amy's age, Galt and Cara, and his wife, Debbie Ann. They decide to confront him and ask him what's up. Dan shows them that he'll be in Boston giving a tour. Nellie drives them there as quickly as possible, avoiding paparazzi the whole way. They arrive and Dan takes the lead, using a fake food delivery as a cover to get them into the Founders Media building that's still under construction. There they find reporters who Dan learns are all owned by Founders Media. Apparently, Pierce has been up to shady stuff because there's a lot of bad press that just never gets reported. Then his assistant Arabella walks in and escorts him to the reception suite. Everyone is given hard hats and led to a cage elevator and go up to the 65th floor. There the Cahills grill Pierce on his shoddy business practices, like possibly bribing a recent widow whose husband died during construction. He quickly ended the press conference, and the siblings follow him, demanding to know why he's been targeting them. He claims not to control what gets printed by his company.
You sure about that? You sure about that?
2 security guards show up, and after subtly threatening the Cahills, he has security escort them away. Dan uses a fake sneeze diversion to reach into a bucket and take some ball bearings. As they're being led away, Amy and Dan witness Pierce grab onto a rope and swing down 10 feet onto a girder and tightrope across to avoid paparazzi.
That's suspicious.
Yeah, it's fine.
That's weird.
Security leads them to the edge of the building, and as they close in on the Cahills, Dan throws the ball bearings in his pockets. They seize the moment to run back to the elevator, catching it as it goes down. They have no choice but to jump on top and ride it down those 65 stories. In the car with Nellie, the kids discuss why Pierce could hate them if they never met him. They arrive back in Attleboro at the Cahill mansion and agree to check the New Jersey Turnpike ticket one of the guards dropped to snoop around. But as they arrive in the command center, Nellie yells for them to go into red alert and the whole system reboots and erases all the data on the hard drives, all Cahill contacts, addresses, and any and all information. She got a call from her computer guy, Pony. Then Mr. Smoot, Mr. McIntyre's lawyer partner, calls to tell them that they're being investigated for embezzlement, to let the FBI agents in, but do not say anything. He's on his way from the hospital. The agents carry out anything of relevance, including the command center computer system. Mr. Smoot leaves not long after they do. Then Pony arrives, giving them new encrypted smartphones and a small notebook. Then he asks for their phones to try and track who hacked them. When Pony leaves, Amy comes to the realization that Pierce must have taken the serum somehow. She theorizes that when Dan assembled the ingredients 6 months ago, the serum got out somehow and into Pierce's hands. Dan tells them how he worked with Cahill cousin Sammy Murad at Columbia University. Nellie says it's endgame. They have to go into hiding. We cut to Pierce talking through video call with some scientists in Australia. They've been testing nukes for him. He wants them to move them to an unspecified location. He plans to start a world war so that he can save the world and have absolute power. Also, he remarks how similar Amy looks to her mother and how it makes him angry thinking of Hope.
Curiouser and curiouser.
Cut to the Cahills arriving at Columbia University in New York City. They meet Murad and bribe him with a pizza. He brings them up to his lab and they discuss what he did. Sammy took a residue sample of the serum and ran experiments on it. He made it less toxic and was even able to replicate forms of the Lucian, Janice, Tomas, and ECAT serums before shutting it down. He says he spoke to Fisk Cahill, who took all the information to the Madrigal archives, but the others tell him Fisk was still in rehab at the time. They visit the Calendar Institute on the Upper East Side, bribing their way into seeing Fisk after hours. Fisk has been in and out of the hospital since a bad fall some months back. He confirms there is a Madrigal archives, but he's never met Sammy. He theorizes that Rutherford is growing in power as he takes a daily dose of the serum. He informs the kids they need to leave the country that night. He tells them about Mr. McIntyre's will and how he inherited a house in Ireland from Grace that was for Amy and Dan, in case things go south and they had nowhere else to go. He says a plane is waiting for them at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. When they leave, Nellie is chasing a tow truck and federal agents apprehend them and throw them in a van. They're driven uptown to a bridge spanning the Harlem River and forced to choose the river or the highway below. These aren't agents at all, but the henchmen. Then a tow truck comes flying out of nowhere, hitting the group, knocking Amy over the railing. Dan catches her by the ankle but is attacked by one of the men. He loses Amy, who grabs a pipe and is able to haul herself back up, just in time to witness the jeep behind the tow truck strike the men. As they drive off, they get stuck on the other side of the locked bridge and climb out the window and start running as the men catch up. They run until they spot a car and pay for a ride. The driver takes them to the Upper West Side, where Fisk is able to get them a ride. On the drive, Dan notes how strong the guys were, like they were boosted with the serum. Nellie waves goodbye and texts Sammy, realizing Pierce is going after anyone with connections to the serum. She doesn't get a response from him. Back at Columbia, she isn't allowed past security and contacts his roommate, who says Sammy had a family emergency and was seen talking with some guys and then collapsed and was led into the car. All he saw was a license plate that read First State, which connects it to the state of Delaware. Meanwhile, the Cahills arrives in Dublin, Ireland, where they meet their contact Declan, who drives them to meet Alapa. The next day in the morning, Dan says he wants out of the family when things are over. Amy is heartbroken, but she understands. They ride bicycles into the village, and after visiting the grocery store and a bar for lunch, they find a large rock with an M carved into it. M for Madrigal. They ask the grocery clerk Fiona about it, and notice an M tattoo on her too. She says it goes back to the village's legend about a woman named Olivia who was born there and had a baby there, Madeline. The village is the Cahill ancestral home. They head back to the cottage and begin searching until Dan finds a secret entrance activated by a sconce hidden behind the stairs. Inside is a secret room. On a table is a painting that Amy made when she was 9 for Grace. It was of the bush in Grace's yard. She had named it George after a pet she buried there. They look around the room and find a file cabinet with duplicate files. Inside the drawers is a secret compartment containing a metal book with an alphabet lock. Amy tries the name George and it opens to reveal a notebook and another smaller box. Inside is a journal with recipes of various kinds. It was Olivia Cahill's journal and it was returned to Minalapa in 1526 by Madeline. They noticed 5 pages are inked out. They realized Olivia had written part of the book in code and that the notebook was Grace's attempt to crack it along with a note for them, telling them they are there for a reason, to protect the serum from getting out. They try cracking the code but can't and give up for the night. Amy can't sleep and instead reads Olivia's journal and comes to realize she was working on an antidote for the serum. She wakes Dan to tell him the news. In Attleboro, Nellie gets an update from Pony that the hacker may have found the Cahills and he's found out who. Someone named Waldo? In an undisclosed location, a girl named April May is revealed to be behind the hacker company Waldo, and she's hot on the tail of the Cahill siblings. In a plane over Western Ireland, Pierce is flying with his 2 kids in the back, Galt and Cara. He's been enhancing them with the serum secretly. It's also revealed he's a controlling monster. Not content with controlling his kids' lives, but even wanting to control what parts of history they're exposed to online. Anyway, he gives them an assignment to find Dan and Amy and report back to him on their coordinates so he can send paparazzi. Then he shoves them out of the plane with parachutes. Back with Dan and Amy, the grocery clerk Fiona gives them a message that their phones are compromised and their location may be as well. They can communicate using an internet cafe in the next village over. Also, some fancy guy has been looking for them. Turns out to be Ian Cabral. I was so used to him and Natalie going everywhere together that I couldn't help but wonder where she was in this scene before remembering she's gone. Ian tries helping them decipher Olivia's journal when Jake and Atticus Rosenblum show up. Immediately, Jake starts being jealous about Ian and Amy being close before stomping inside. Ian decides to go for a walk. Atticus and Jake help Amy and Dan translate the Latin and Italian respectively. Atticus is shown the secret room and asks Amy to find something that doesn't belong, and she says the ornate mirror. Atticus realizes that the code is mirror writing. They're able to deduce that Leonardo da Vinci was Olivia Cahill's mentor. That's why she knew Italian. The 2 Rosenblums get down to deciphering the rest of it, and as Amy watches the 2 close brothers, she fears for their possible deaths and asks them to leave. With Ian, he's consumed by thoughts of jealousy and loneliness. He's biking through to Ballycreel when he gets lost and narrowly avoids getting hit by a car. The driver is a girl named Maura, who apologizes and offers to drive him the rest of the way. She picks up Ian's fallen phone and hands it to him. On the way, she tells him about her family and the home they live in that's actually a castle. She correctly deduces that he is wealthy, and the 2 bond over their experience with large homes of wealth. She drops him off on the main street in Ballycreel and gives him a card with her name and number. Her full name reads Mara Devon Carlyle, and when she's out of sight, Ian rips it up, not to be tempted. Then he begins a long walk back to the safe house. Back with Amy, Dan, Jake, and Atticus, Ian walks in on the beginning of an argument. Dan and Amy head upstairs to argue in private. Amy wanting to get the Rosenblums out of harm's way, but Dan reminding her they're family. They're interrupted by the arrival of Fiona, warning them they need to get out because a black SUV pulled up in the village looking for them. They pack quickly and try to escape by boat but are immediately pursued by another boat. Fiona expertly drives the boat, getting Amy, Dan, and Ian as quickly as possible to the cliffs of Moher. She explains that the waves in that area can get as big as 40 feet. As the boat gets close, Dan points out the henchmen in it as they raise a rifle and begin shooting in their direction. Everyone gets down, but then they strike a rock and the boat starts taking on water. Then comes Declan and others riding jet skis and lugging surfboards. Amy gives Fiona Olivia's book as she boards a jet ski, and so does Ian, Amy, and Dan. But to get to land, they'll have to surf. Each of them rides behind a surfer who helps guide them to shore. As Dan begins to swim the rest of the way to shore, he helps save a drowning Amy, the 2nd time he saved her life so far. On land, Declan goes into a nearby van to change as Fiona hands them a warm thermos. The plan is for Declan to drive them to a nearby airport and catch a flight. When they consider how they were found, they go back to Ian's accident with Maura. They realize she put a tracker on his phone, but because him and Jake have the same phone case, they switched phones by mistake, so now Jake and Atticus are in danger.
Well, we're boned.
Back in Attleboro, Nellie had been keeping Pony fed as she waits for him to help her get a secure network back up. He gives her new secure phones and tells her he's been spying on April May without her knowing, and he's learned that Pierce bought a pharmaceutical company in Wilmington, Delaware, and shut it down. Nellie theorizes Sammy was taken there to help mass produce the serum. But she also needs to get the phones to Amy and Dan. He found them on London CCTV footage and says Waldo could also find them this way. She asks Pony to help deliver the phones to them personally. He is reluctant at first, being an introvert and all, but she begs and mentions he can travel with Jonah Wizard. He packs up and comes back with his luggage and cat. While waiting at the front door, he grabs a manila envelope addressed to Amy. In London, Debbie Ann walks into Pierce's room, saying she's off to do some shopping for teddy bears. It's like her thing. While she talks, he's just thinking about how much he can't stand her and how inferior he thinks she is. He keeps her around because he thinks having a plain wife will boost his numbers, but considers the possibility of the sympathy found in being a recent widow while in office.
I hate you so much.
As Amy, Ian, and Dan are landing in London, Nellie calls Jake's phone and is surprised when Amy answers. She updates them that Pony and Jonah are on their way with secure phones. She also tells them about Sammy and the plan to mass produce the serum. She's already on her way to Delaware. She calls Ian's phone and thankfully Jake picks up. She tells him what happened and gives him orders to meet them and ditch the phone. Ian tells them the fastest way is on the tube. As he guides the Cahills, he apologizes for his blunder. But Amy reminds him they're just kids.
Won't somebody please think of the children?
With Jake and Atticus also in London, Jake does his best to stay alert and watch his surroundings as he ditches the phone, and him and his brother enter a bookshop. They sneak out the back and onto a busy street before men start pursuing them. They hop on a bus and are able to lose them for now. April May sends a text update to J. Rutherford Pierce, notifying him on the Cahill's location. Pony and Jonah are at the Greenwood Hotel when Amy, Dan, and Ian arrive. As Pony gives them the new phones, Jake and Atticus arrive. Jake tells Amy that Pierce is planning a celebration at the end of a press tour where he'll announce his run for presidency. Amy thinks it's the perfect time to slip him the antidote. Meanwhile, Pierce's forces have scoured one of the 4 hotels looking for the Cahills and moved on to the next. The Cahills pore over Olivia's book and figure out that the cipher is an alphabet replacement where you substitute G for A and continue from there. The text mentions a lost Leonardo manuscript titled The Lost Cities Codex. It goes on to talk about 7 civilizations' final list of cures, poisons, and potions, closely guarded by countless generations until it landed in Leonardo and then Olivia's hands. Gideon Cahill used the secrets to concoct the serum, and Olivia used it to craft the antidote. Amy figured out that there is more code written in the dark pages of Olivia's book, and using a magnifying glass to decipher it. It's the list of ingredients, but Jake tells them Silphium, a plant, and the Anatolian leopard are extinct. However, the group is determined to succeed and make ready to leave. But the goons are on their way to their hotel as they do. Amy and Jake step aside in an elevator to talk. She wants to keep things friendly and realizes he's jealous of Ian.
Are you kidding me? Are you out of your mind?
But they're interrupted by the appearance of 2 thugs on the 2nd floor, and Amy rushes to close the elevator, barely succeeding and texts Dan to bail out. When they get to the mezzanine, they bolt for the exit as the 2 men appear from the emergency stairwell. They run into Dan and the others, but can't leave through the front because of more henchmen. They try for a side exit and exit onto a road and head to the British Library to try and lose the 6 pursuers. Jake and Ian try to talk to the front desk to get them into a private tour to look for an employee exit, but Amy gets held hostage by one of the thugs holding a hypodermic needle to her spine, threatening Dan to gather the others and follow. But Pony pulls out a radio and does some sick dancing that gets a bunch of people running to find Jonah Wizard and cause a scene. Even Jake and Atticus dance in perfect sync to the music and joins the flash mob. The scene was such a tonal shift, not that I'm complaining. It brought a smile to my face. Anyway, they sneak away in the chaos. We cut to April May realizing she's been hacked. She updates a demanding Pierce that the Cahill's next destination is Istanbul. Then, while reviewing CCTV footage of the library, she learns that Rutherford has been lying to her.
I was in pure shock.
She considers the reality that she will have to do fieldwork to find out the truth. The Cahills, Rosenblums, Ian, Pony, and Jonah are on board a flight to Istanbul and discuss the history of the city of Troy and what causes cities and civilizations to fall. They realize the seriousness of Pierce's threat to the world. When they land, they discuss possible routes to finding the leopard whiskers when Pony hacks into a wildlife organization camera that's been monitoring the mountains and may have spotted a leopard in the area. In Wilmington, Delaware, Nellie pulls up to Trilon Laboratories. She calls Ian to get fake credentials to get into the facility since they're now hiring. She plans to sneak in to find Sammy, expose the truth, or die trying.
No, God!
Hamilton Holt lands at Ataturk Airport, where he meets Jonah, and the two head to a van to meet the others. They're unknowingly followed by a henchman. They're taken to Antalya by Adil, their driver, and check into a hotel. Adil gives them directions to a coffee shop in the old city, and they meet Sadiq, someone who can help them navigate the Taurus Mountains. They're able to convince him to be their guide to help track the leopard. They leave at dawn. Amy, Dan, Ian, Hamilton, and a last-minute Jake join Sadiq, while Atticus and Jonah will hit up the museum. Pony is staying at the hotel. Along the way, they stop at a small village to pick up two of Sadiq's friends, Orhan and Darren. Then they press on into the Taurus mountain range, park, and follow the mountain guides along a less-traveled trail. They camp for the night, planning to head up further in the morning. When Orhan goes to scout ahead, he comes back to tell them he found a leopard paw print. We cut to Jonah and Atticus at the Museum of Historical and Ancient Curiosities. There, they learn from the curator that he does have leopard whiskers preserved in amber, but they're missing. Back with Amy, Dan, and the others, Jake wakes up Amy because the guides fled and there are henchmen on the trail. They flee upwards, climbing the cliffs to hide out in the shallow limestone caves as the men begin shooting at them.
I started blasting. Bah! Bah!
Amy isn't feeling too well, but is determined to climb. The gang hides out in separate caves, her and Dan together in one cave. The men camp out below, waiting them out. That's when Amy hears a growl behind her in the cave. She follows a stream in the cave towards another opening where she finds the leopard. She is feverish and suffering altitude sickness when she sees the leopard is gone, and in its place are 6 whiskered covered in amber. But one of the henchmen comes at her, and she is barely saved by Jake with a paralyzing gun. Together, they search the area, and instead of leopard prints, they find only the impression of a boot. I'm glad to be back with the Cahills for another globe-trotting adventure, although I'm not a fan of the forced conflict with Amy, Ian, and Jake. These books are better when the romance is a background element. It did break my heart that Dan wants to leave because, it's still a decision to leave his sister in the end. I did laugh when the FBI came barging in about their supposed white-collar crimes because, how else do y'all think you're accumulating wealth? Sweetie, it's impossible to have billions without going about it in a way that hurts others. They probably never even considered where their wealth comes from in the first place. I doubt the authors really give it much thought either. It is an escapist fantasy after all. Every time we cut to Pierce and his family, I just kept envisioning the evil family from that one episode of the Powerpuff Girls, so I can't wait to see more from Debbie Ann, Kara, and Galt. Also, fun fact, the Anatolian snow leopard was discovered again in 2023, so they're not extinct. Anyway, I've never gotten this far before in the 39 Clues, so all of this is a first for me, and I'm having fun so far. I'll catch you all in the next one where we recap Breakaway. Until then, leave a like, comment below, and subscribe if you haven't already. Bye!
Bye!